Hi, welcome back to Middle East in Crisis. I'm your host, Nestle Hannah Erishkin, and we will be talking about Orientalism to Islamophobia. So I thought a good place to start off with would be going back to Edward Said's Orientalism, because there's no other place better to start than his work, because it's just the foundation of everything. If you haven't read it at this point, you really should. Or maybe just keep watching my videos. I'll just keep circling back. And so, in Orientalism, he outlines 4 categories in Chapter 3, Orientalism Now. And one of them is called Merely Islam, which is pretty much, besides him just outlining everything that we got wrong with studying Islam, he outlines how Islam was also grouped into the Orientalist view. It wasn't just communities and cultures, it was also religions that got overly simplified. And Orientalists would view Islam as lesser, in that Muslims were not as richly human as people in the West or Christians. That the Muslim mind was not as capable since they spoke Arabic, which is not true. Many Muslims speak various different languages. So I just wanted to dispel that one. Not all Muslims know Arabic. Like, someone came up to me in high school and so you speak Arabic? And no, I don't. Just because I grew up Muslim does not mean I know Arabic. I should, but I don't. And so, but yeah, so they believed that the Arab language was not as sophisticated as Christian languages, and because of that, they were less capable of thought or true thought, as they believed. And so, which is obviously wrong. I'm just going to go on tangents this whole video, won't I? Because that's completely wrong. It doesn't matter what language you speak. It does not hinder you from having sophisticated and complicated thought. You can be an idiot speaking English. You can be a genius speaking Arabic. It doesn't matter what language you are. But I think we established that the Orientalists got a lot of things wrong. And so let's just kind of start back of why did Western scholars start studying Islam? Where did this originate from? Because we know the byproduct, which I'll get to more later on, but we know the byproduct, but where did this train of madness start from? So it started in Germany. And so it started with German Romanticism and their view of that Europe was incomplete. They were missing something. They had modernized. They had gone through the Enlightenment. They were sophisticated now. And so now they were wow, we lost something. We have all these new things, but we have lost the sense of the past. They had a romanticize. That's why they're called romantics. They had lost this romantic element of the past, or what they thought the past was. And as they were looking at their world in the 18th century, they looked to the East and they saw a society which they had deemed as lesser than, that they have deemed backwards and stuck in the past, and that they weren't as educated and modernized and sophisticated as Europeans were with their sophisticated technology. I don't know what technology they had. That's not what I do. I should know. And so they were And looking to the East, and they saw this romanticized past, and they thought that was their missing piece, so they started to study it. They started to romanticize it, and they started to get a lot wrong. So they started studying Islam, but they started studying it as a preconceived notion, as Islam was already wrong. Because if you fall into any religion or any community or anything, just religions give you another sense of community. And that community and identity is tied to different points in history and linking to other cultural groups and religious groups, and you make this network. And up until this point, they didn't have Islam in their network, and they didn't have Muslims in their network. They might have. I mean, there was a Muslim population in Europe, just as there was a Christian population in the Middle East. Like, no place is synonymous with, like, one religion. That would be a dictatorship. That would be forced. But since that, there's always, like, minorities, there's always groups, but they didn't have this in their network, Islam, and their historical links were afraid. They thought of the Crusades and battles, and so they were looking through it at a very different point of view lens that we might perceive it today, now that we have more diversity and hopefully we have a more open mind. And so, yeah, so they had these two groups that hadn't interacted much, and they didn't have many links to each other in their webs. And so they started to study Islam in the West without Muslims. It also didn't help that they thought they were less superior. But they started studying them with this fallacy that they were already incorrect before they started studying them. They already had this preconceived notion. And so they started coming up with all these ideas of what Islam is, that it's a legalistic religion, that is black and white, mostly because they were studying Islam through a rationalist lens, which looks at the world as black and white, legalistic, very scientific and objective. Like, they were looking at it through this very, like, strict lens, but no religion is black and white. There's no categories. And so, yeah, they had all these notions, and as it started to gain momentum, and these Western scholars and how they viewed Islam started teaching it to the next generation, and they kept teaching it, and these biases got solidified in what is Islam. And so that it's not as sophisticated, and it's, like I said, legalistic and backwards, and there's not as much complexity. We always forget that Islam has various sects in it. And so these biases got ingrained. And so then that gave way to Orientalism and evolved into that. And these biases started to seep their way into the public conscious, into our media, how we view Islam, not just from an academic sense, but from a political, a social viewpoint. And so you could see it in media coverage and how we view Islam as very distant and far away and stuck in a different decade or century. And then you can start to see almost the Orientalist view seeping into the Orient itself and how they perceive themselves in their media coverage, and it almost became a counter argument to that. And this chasm between these two groups kept growing farther and farther and farther apart until the view of each other became so disoriented that they weren't even a picture of them true selves anymore. And so that's how you get Islamophobia. It's the fear of the other, which is based in fiction. And so what can we do now after centuries of this now? We could start to look at Islam and study it with the complexity that we take in studying other religions. And realize that a romanticized past is not the past. That we all have nostalgia for a forgotten era, but that is a forgotten era. If the past was so wonderful, we would still have elements of it, and we still have elements of the past in today. But if it was so perfect, we wouldn't be in the present. And so I hope that you can see that nostalgia, when taken seriously in academic study, can warp and change our perception to a point that we don't even recognize it from reality. So hopefully we could do better in the past and study it from a more holistic point of view. So I hope that gives you some food for thought, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye!